Thanks, Tyler. Good afternoon, everyone. Should get used to that. I'm hoping for some participation this weekend. I'm hoping for some interaction as we go along. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so hopefully we'll see how this goes. So first of all, it's good to see you all, and it's a pleasure for Martha and me to be with you this weekend. And we're hopeful that our time together can be mutually beneficial. Please come and say hello, introduce yourself. Even if I should know your name, you might have to remind me of your name. And I've noticed these have come around, so this is good. Each in here you will find some notes. These are kind of my notes, so you can follow along in point form. They are here. Just to give you an idea of where we're going, you'll be able to kind of see where we are in the scheme of things. And they've done a nice job leaving some room for your own extra notes if you like. And it looks like there's some maybe pens even coming around. So it's excellent. Yeah, that's really, really good. So our overall theme for the weekend is idol worship in the 21st century, being the century that we're in. And the three talks today really kind of climax with that, with our talk this evening. They really fit together as a nice unit. And you can see we're starting here with a little sort of play on the words, I guess. It's idol worship in the 21st century, BC, before Christ. That is to say that essentially this has been an issue for God's people from the very, very beginning of time. So we'll see how that works. Now that we'll see how this works. No, it's not reaching there, Nathan. So should I just run it from here, or what do you think? It's just that one video, there's only difference, so. Okay. I think we will. I think if I plug in here, you'll just pick it up back there? Yeah, we had one trouble with the audio of one video, so I think for my mental health, it's probably better if I'm running the slides as opposed to trying to say, next. I'll need a little adapter there, Nathan. So we will get this sorted. Actually, I guess I really don't, because I could have I'm standing right here. Anyway, thank you. So the question then, really, before we get into the topic is it relevant today to talk about idol worship? I don't know what you think of idolatry. When we think of like carved images and people bowing down to them and praying to them, so is it relevant for us today? Uh-oh. Thank you. So these passages are there on your handout, but just think about this. Just don't bother turning it up. Just think about it for now. In Galatians chapter 5, these are of course the works of the flesh, right? This is where we come to learn about the fruits of the Spirit. And we read through these. The works of the flesh are evident. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness. Like these things that we obviously would say are problematic. Well, in that list is idolatry. Now, Paul's writing, obviously, 2,000 years ago. And he goes on to say, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies. Many of these things we would identify with. And maybe some of these are, jump out to you individually as a person as, oh, that kind of is something I struggle with. But the point of the passage is that all of these things will exclude from the kingdom of God. So there has to be something in that's relevant for today. I mean, that's the amazing thing of God's word, is that it's timeless. So if hatred is a problem, and contentions and jealousy and sexual immorality, then somehow idolatry must relate. But we still might be thinking, really, do we want to spend a weekend talking about idolatry? That's maybe a little bit of a stretch in 2024. Well, maybe if we lived in Thailand, Martha and I were privileged to be able to go to Thailand last year at about this time. And the picture on the left there is way down in a cave. We'd been walking for several hundred meters underground, and we came right to the end, and there was this idol. The main idol is up here, up these stairs, But on either side of the base of the stairs, there were these young people. And this guy was praying to something. And I don't know if you noticed anything peculiar down here. What's this look like? Anyone want to, can you see what that is? I heard it. Heard someone excited down there. That's like a dump truck. There's some toys there. This idol here has been given these gifts. So children have walked with their parents probably a kilometer underground to get to this place, to leave for the idol something significant to them. So whatever was kind of, if it's special to you, then you leave it for the idol. That's not a shop. Those aren't for sale. They're left there. Someone cleans it out later, I guess. So that's maybe what we think of idolatry. And this was the video that we couldn't, there's no audio now, but just watch this. We're in a temple. This is now above ground. And I don't know if I was allowed to film this, but I did. And we'll see now if it'll play. Come on, play. No, it won't even play anything. Nope. Okay. Try this again. There we go. So this is in a temple. There's some chanting going on. That's the only audio that you're not hearing, which is not a big deal. There's this some idol in this thing. They're putting money in there. They float money down into it. And people are obviously devoted to this particular idol or Buddha or whoever it happened to be. Thailand is 97% Buddhist. And I pan across here and you can see all the idols. And like on cue, this couple here, or this mother and a child, kind of did their thing. Like this is serious. There's just chanting going on. So maybe we think, well, okay, that's idolatry, and fortunately for us, we don't need to worry about that. That's not relevant to us. We're not doing that to any idols. So let's take 60 seconds. Idolatry in Australia. Do we need to worry about it? What kind of things might be concern? Because we're not living in Thailand here at the moment. So this is a brainstorming part. Go for it. Do we have idols in Australia? Sydney, New South Wales. Influencers. Okay. Social media. Anyone over, I don't know, 50, man, I don't know what he's talking about. Influencers. Yep. Go ahead. Sorry? Sports stars. We call them idols sometimes. Who's your idol? In the AFL or the NRL or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Career. Sure. We worship. We devote all our time to a career. A few seconds left on the timer. Politicians. I don't know which half of the log that is. If the part you put in the fire or the part you bow down and worship to. Yeah. For sure. Technology. We're going to talk about technology tonight, for sure. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement this is probably worthwhile. It may not be like what the few brothers and sisters there are in Thailand face in terms of like that kind of idolatry, but there is an issue for us. So these ones here, so there's going to be 3 passages in the New Testament that we mention. So here we're in Galatians chapter 3. The only reason you might want to turn these up is if you want to do some coloring in. Otherwise, they're here on the screen, and you've got them in your notes there on the first page. So these are the things that we need to, the King James says, I think, mortify or put to death. Fornication, so that's sexual immorality. Uncleanness, passion, evil desire. Again, we're like checking the boxes here. Yeah, these things are not good. But then it goes on to say covetousness, which is idolatry. Oh. Do you think in the Western world today we struggle with covetousness? I think so. So that's idolatry. Here in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5, you know that no sexually immoral or fornicator or unclean person will inherit the kingdom. But stuck right in there also is a covetous man who is an idolater. So all of a sudden, I'm not so much worried about people putting in money in their thing to their little Buddha idol or, bowing down to the chants and worshiping that. It all of a sudden hits maybe a bit closer to home. So if you like to color things in and you want to be reminded, in my Bible, I have colored in covetousness and idolatry are linked. Okay, so all of a sudden now, in 2024, in the 21st century, covetousness might be a problem for us. So hopefully that by just sort of way of introduction, you're kind of, okay, give me a few classes today, at least try and make that point. But what about this one? Does anyone know, this is Samuel and Saul. Okay. What's the background to this story here in 1 Samuel 15? What's going on in this picture? What's just happened or not happened? Saul and Samuel, and this one about it's better to obey than to sacrifice. What had Saul just suggested? Right. All right, so go and wipe out everything about the Amalekites, man, woman, child, beast, everything. And Saul's like, well, but we kept some of the best stuff to sacrifice to God, right? And Samuel's like, that's not the way it works. To obey is better than sacrifice, right? And to hearken or to heed than the fat of rams. We quote that quite a bit, but maybe the next verse doesn't quite often. For rebellion is a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is iniquity and idolatry. So not only is covetousness likened to idolatry, so is stubbornness. Anyone stubborn out there? Okay. If you're stubborn, you're an idolater. Probably who are you worshiping if you're stubborn? Probably worshiping yourself. But anyway, again, the link in Scripture is that covetousness is like idolatry. That's timeless. And stubbornness is like idolatry. And that's timeless. So I think to talk about idol worship in the 21st century, I think we're on safe ground. So the first class then is, am I doing something? No. The first class then is idol worship in the 21st century BC. So we're going to basically look at a broad overview of the Old Testament and their struggles with idolatry. And you'll see some linkages, obviously, to today. Our second class is on the first century, at the time of the New Testament. And then our class this evening will be focusing, with that background and that lead up, on the things we face today. So that's the plan for our three studies today. So the commandments, the 10 commandments. Well, the first two deal directly with this head on, and I think really set the tone for why idolatry is such a problem. So Exodus 20 verse 3, don't have any other gods. So if there's anything that's sort of a replacement for God in your life, that's a problem. That's idolatry. In verse 4, it goes on to say, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. So, gods could be, they worship the sun, moon, and the stars. There could be ideas. There could be all kinds of things that are considered a god. The second commandment then really sort of goes one step further and says, don't make anything that you're going to worship as a god. So the first two commandments deal with idolatry. And I think we'd say that, the commandments are timeless. Right? The 10 Commandments are things there's principles in there that are relevant for us today. So idolatry is included. But then number 10, does anyone know what the 10th commandment is? If you don't have these marked out in your Bible, it'd probably be good to just look a little highlighter, make sure you can find all 10. It's quite interesting. They break into categories. Probably done this in Sunday school. The first 4 or 5 kind of relate to... Sorry? And what is it? Do not envy other people's stuff. We got a smart one there in the crowd. Thank you very much. And a good example for the older ones in the crowd that it's okay to speak up. Verse 17 says, it's the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, says in the King James, or envy. And we've just learned that covetousness is idolatry. So really, the 10 commandments start and end with idolatry. Don't make other images, serve other gods, and don't covet. And technology is very unreliable, so that's why you shouldn't worship it as a god. I'm pretty dependent upon it for today, though, so just a little bit of anxiety. I think we'll be okay. All right, our reading that we had in Genesis 35. This is one of those things I'm hoping that sometimes when you look at a study, maybe you hadn't thought of thinking about idolatry as an issue. Once you start thinking about it and seeing it, and if you're doing your daily readings or wherever, I think you'll see it everywhere. You might have. This is a story that's it's not new to us. We know the life of Jacob very, very well. Chapter 34 is the defilement of Dinah, and all that went down there. Jacob's obviously in a bit of stress. He's under a bit of stress. In chapter 35, God says, "Look, Jacob, it's kind of like time to get back on track. You've come back from 20 years in exile with Laban. You come back into the land. You got to kind of get your act together." So in verse 1, God said to Jacob, "Arise and go to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar there to God." So Jacob's like, "Okay, we're going to Bethel." And of course, Bethel is house of God. So like we're coming together. We're coming back into the land. We're going to where God is. First thing first, we got to get rid of the foreign gods. It's like, whoa. So Jacob, in his house, his household, his entourage, his sons and everything that he had, they brought back with them from the land where Laban was, up in Haran, foreign gods. So put away your foreign gods, purify yourselves, change your garments. We're going to the house of God. So I think this then comes kind of a theme for the people of God. So they gave them up to Jacob. Interestingly enough, he buries them under a tree there. One of the themes of this that we're going to see over these first 3 classes is, what do we have to do with idols? Burying them isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because you can always dig them up. We'll see that King Josiah had a better idea of what to do with idols, although even then that wasn't totally successful. So Jacob, one of the patriarchs, the founders, the one who we would look to, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, even Jacob struggled in his family with idol worship. Now we're just going to go through a series of things here. Okay. This quote here is from where? The book of Joshua. So, right, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua. Anyone get any closer? Chapter 24? Okay, it's in there. I think it's 24. We'll see in a minute. Okay. How many people have a sign or something, a welcome mat, a poster, a picture in their house with this quote? This is like one of the quotes that everyone has, right? "As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord." That's great. It's a great reminder. And it's one of those things, I don't know about you, but quite often we have these quotes that we know. We tell people and Learn to Read the Bible Effectively seminars that context is really important. And then sometimes we're like, oh, I don't know the context of that, right? The context of this one, well, turn it up. It's probably worthwhile. It's in Joshua 24. The context of this, it's towards the end. They've conquered in the land. Joshua's going to leave them. It's getting towards the end. They're kind of going to be on their own. And he's like, "Look, you got a choice to make, people. We've destroyed many of the Canaanites, but not all of them. Here we are. You have a choice to make." And it's in the same context of worshiping God in sincerity and truth. This is John chapter 4, worshiping God in spirit and truth. Make a choice. The context is, look, we've taken over the land here. You got to worship God, so put away all the other gods. Get rid of them. Get rid of these idols. Get rid of these things out of your life. But if that's difficult for you, if you don't really want to serve Yahweh, you got to make a choice. You make a choice. So he's addressing the people. If it seems evil for you to serve Yahweh, choose for yourselves this day whom you're going to serve, whether the gods that your fathers served on the other side, like ancient history, or the gods of the people that are here in the land. You got lots of choices. There's lots of gods. But as for me and my house, we're serving Yahweh. So good for you if you have that on your wall in a painting, the welcome mat at your door. Good for you. But understand that if you're standing with Joshua and saying, "As for me and my house, when you enter this house, we serve Yahweh," ask yourself, when people enter your home, do they see lots of other gods in there? Because Joshua's saying you got to make a choice. You can serve those other gods, but I'm serving Yahweh. So if that's the claim we're making for our house, then I think it's only fair that we need to also put away the gods of the people of the land. Because that's the context of Joshua 24. great to make the statement, but do we back it up in our behavior? And that's really the challenge that we all face. Okay. You don't need to turn these all up. They're here, and we're just going to kind of hit some key points here. This is the time of the judges. This is just before they call Jephthah. Israel's in a bad way, and they eventually in the next chapter will turn to Jephthah. This is God speaking, and he says, "You've forsaken me. You've served other gods. Therefore, I'm done delivering you." Like we can't go through this cycle. You know the cycle in the judges. You know they are doing well, seeking God. They sin, and you know that cycle that they're going through. They cry out for salvation, and God sends them a savior. God's like, look, you've been serving these other idols, so like, why don't you ask them for help? This is God speaking to the people. It's ironic, I guess, a way, a little bit maybe sarcastic. You know, go and cry to the other gods which you've chosen. Let them deliver you in your times of distress. Why do you always just come to me when things go wrong? You're serving all these other things, and again, we need to think about ourselves. What have we put our trust in? Have we put our trust in our bank account or our career or our schooling or whatever it is? Is that where we've invested our time and energy and that we really put our confidence in? And then when that goes poorly, we're like, oh, God, help us. And he's like, why don't you go cry out to the things that you've put your trust in? The children have said they cry out then to Yahweh, we have sinned. Do what is best. Do to us whatever seems best, but please deliver us. So they put away their foreign gods and served Yahweh, and his soul can no longer endure the misery. So once they turned back to God, then God sent another savior, and in the next chapter, that's going to be Jephthah. So if this sounds familiar, it certainly does in my life. That we kind of forget about God until troubles arise. And then we almost have to hear this voice like, well, what got you into this mess? Why are you here? What you've kind of strayed from me. So we need to kind of put those things in check. And of course, the cycle will often come around, even in our own lives. Okay, so we've come through right from the time of Genesis, Jacob's family. We've seen the times of Joshua, the times of Samuel. Judges. We come then to the times of Samuel. This is Samuel crying out to the people. It's the same story. It's like deja vu all over again, as I would say, right? And I guess the premise I'm making is, if this is true, I mean, we're not dealing with the wicked, rebellious ones here. This is the time of Jacob and Joshua, and the judges was different. Here's the time of Samuel. They've had Samuel the prophet there with them. And yet here he says to them, if you return to Yahweh with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods. You can't do both. You can't serve both. We try. We think we can kind of manage it somehow, that we can kind of dabble in this and dabble in that and still serve God. He's saying, look, that's not going to work. We'll talk about the Ashtoreths in a minute. And he says, prepare your hearts for Yahweh and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So again, they'd run up against this situation where they cried out to God in time of distress. And the children of Israel put away the Baal and the Ashtoreth and served Yahweh only. So, hopefully that just by way of introduction, we shouldn't be surprised. Two things. We shouldn't be surprised if we struggle with some of these things, because faithful men and women of old have. That's on the one side. The other side is, if you thought, well, idolatry is that kind of like an Old Testament thing, or maybe different countries. I think it's good for us to think about, how does this apply to us? And obviously, I'll give you some suggestions and some ideas, and we can maybe share some ideas. But hopefully, you'll say, okay, there's something about my life today that parallels these things, and I need to call it in check. If I really want to serve Yahweh with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength, and all my might, then I need to get rid of these idols that might be in my life. And whatever they're called. In Samuel's day, they were called Baal and Ashtoreth. What we're going to do is, We're going to go through some of them, just in case. I'm sure many of you know some of these. This is Ashtaroth, and there's a quote from Judges, and you can see they were gods of Syria, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, the Philistines. And the trouble was they forsook Yahweh and didn't serve him. When Samuel told the people you can't serve the idols and God, or when Jesus says you can't serve God and mammon, it's because serving these idols takes us away from God. And I think that's what's happening here. Now, Ashtoreth here, also known as Ishtar, Astari, Astar. Someone mentioned earlier, we have our stars today. In Hollywood and in sports and in all kinds of places, we have stars. She was the moon goddess of the Phoenicians, their principal female deity, so the counterpart to Baal. So Baal and Ashtaroth were the two principal male and female gods. Ultimately called Aphrodite by the Greeks, so you can see she just morphed and changed. Her name changed for the different cultures, but the gist of it was the same. And the worship was associated with the most impure rites, and you can see from the images. So I picked the least offensive ones, and some of these are literally 4,000 years old. The stone, and it got to the point where I couldn't put them up here on the screen. In the King James Version, it says groves. They went and worshipped amongst the groves. This is the word Asherah, and I think some of the modern translations say they worshipped among the Asherah poles. So they would have been trees. Ironically, maybe, the Hebrew word literally means happy or straight. The behavior in there was anything but straight in terms of not being perverse, but probably the idea of being hidden. In the groves, up on the high places, no one would see you. You could kind of go there and participate in this worship and really just indulge in the flesh. And I think ultimately that was why it was so popular to the people. They basically could, they thought they were worshiping, and yet they were just fulfilling their wildest impulses. Baal, we know a fair bit of. Baal simply means Lord, which is significant because there's only one Lord. As we've mentioned, he was the male counterpart to the Asherah poles. And when we see Baals or Baalim plural, that's just because it's plural. He was also the sun god. The chief object of worship for the Canaanites, and each place had, its unique Baal, Lord of certain things. There was Lord of this and Lord of that, maybe Lord of the sky, Lord of the sea, Lord of the, that was part of it. Whatever your little thing was, it was your interest, there was a god or an idol associated with that. If you were a farmer, you'd pray to these certain gods and so on. It was very localized. And as we've mentioned, probably the attractiveness of the worship was because of the licentious character of the worship. And I guess, for us, we'd say, okay, what's Lord of our life? Do we have multiple lords? We worship God, we believe in God, the creator of heaven and earth, but we have these other things that rule us, that are our overlords, if you will. This is perhaps one of the most unbelievable ones, and maybe when you're reading the Old Testament, sometimes you're like, can hardly believe what you're reading. Archaeologically, they've proven that this was actually the case, that this Molech was something perhaps like the graphic here. Might have been exactly like this, but it was basically some sort of furnace with arms outstretched either to the side, or you could actually put the child on the arms, and it would be offered in fire. Like it would be, apparently sometimes they would only be scarred. Some have suggested that might have happened to Hezekiah. Or they threw them into the fire. So I have a quote here. It says, speaking of this Molech, his face was that of a calf, and his hands stretched forth like a man who opens his hands to receive something of his neighbor. They kindled within it a fire. The priest took the baby and put it in the hands of Molech. So they literally offered their children in fire to Molech. Interesting, in the mythology that surrounded this Canaanite god Molech, they saw Molech as a consuming and destroying fire. So we like an all-consuming fire, and you sort of gave you the best. So that's why they gave their children. Like that was kind of like this, what greater sacrifice could you make kind of thing. But also purifying. We sang a hymn about a refiner's fire. And you can see how there's the imagery here, and the language is similar. Like we believe that God brings us through challenges and trials to purify us, purify our heart. Well, somehow they just messed that up in their own way and thought, well, okay, if we appease this God, if we give our children to this God, then life will be better. He'll look after us. He'll send rain, or he'll provide for the crops, or all these things. They'd somehow really, really messed up in their heads. But you can see it's a blend of truth. And maybe that can make us think a little bit about some of the things we might do today that we justify or we think are okay because it kind of sounds right, or we talk about, I got to make a sacrifice, in order to accomplish this, or I need to give up something in order to do that, and we maybe justify things in our life because it's in the long run it'll work out okay. I have a little story here. When we did these many years ago, we had a sister in our meeting, and hockey's big in Canada, as you know. So she was talking to her neighbor, and her neighbor said to her, like, I guess they were talking about we're going to church or not. And I don't know what it's like here, but quite often the hockey's on a Sunday morning. And this neighbor said to this sister in our ecclesia, I had to sacrifice church to take my son to hockey. And the sister in our meeting, who's pretty quick on her feet, said, I had to sacrifice hockey to take my son to church. And, it's like you have that choice. And that's probably not uncommon in Canada with respect to hockey. There's probably something equivalent here as well. And it could be sport, it could be career, it could be education, it could be all kinds of things where, are we literally giving our children over to this God, thinking that it's going to be like a purifying or a good thing for them, but really we've just sacrificed them to the gods of the world. Okay, not sure why it happened there. There we go. This is interesting. The golden calf is maybe one of the classic idol worship stories. And this is Exodus 32, verse 6, which simply says, they rose up early in the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. What's interesting? What's the background of this story? Why all of a sudden they worshiping a golden calf? Where are they? What's going on in the background of this story? Anybody? Moses is up the mountain. It's been gone for 40 days. And the people are like, we don't know what happened to Moses. He brought us here, and I guess we're just on our own now. So let's make a calf and worship it. Right? What's also interesting about, what's maybe not mentioned in that quote? The calf is really just an excuse to eat and drink and play, right? Just come over to 1 Corinthians 7. I think this is the insidiousness, maybe, of idolatry, is that you may not even know you're doing it. Because life's just kind of going on. In 1 Corinthians 10, it's the well-known section here where he talks about the being baptized into Moses in the sea. So he's taking the wilderness wanderings, Paul, through the Spirit, right, guiding him, is taking them through the history of Israel and drawing out spiritual lessons, right? So when they went through the Red Sea, it was like baptism. Okay, so then when they're in the wilderness wanderings, that's kind of like our probation before we go into the promised land. That's why it's so rich and powerful. These things were written for our learning, that we through patience and cover the scriptures might have hope, right? That's why they're written there. So you've got the going through the Red Sea. They did all eat the same spiritual food, right? The manna came down from heaven, not literally, but it was provided by God, just like Jesus came down from heaven, not literally, but was provided by God, and we eat his flesh and drink his blood. Okay, so you can see all the connections here. They drank the same spiritual drink. In fact, it came out of a rock. The rock was Christ. That's why you smote it the first time, because Jesus was crucified, but then you speak to it, because Jesus isn't crucified twice. So you see all these lessons that are coming out, right? Do you see that? Then verse 6, these things were an example for us. And then verse 7, don't be idolaters. Okay, so what happened thousands of years before Christ, Paul is referring to the people in his day, okay, and say, don't you be idolaters like them. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And then he goes on to another story. Don't commit fornication like they did. We're going to look at that on Sunday morning, actually, because that's the story with Phinehas. Okay? So when Paul quotes the story of what we call the golden calf, did he mention the golden calf? No. We might give Paul a failing grade on his research on the incident from Exodus 32. He doesn't even mention a calf. But that's kind of the whole point. It could have been a calf, could have been whatever. I think we have our golden calf. Kind of looks like that. That's the one on Wall Street, in case you didn't know. So that's like the financiers, right? That's where the bullish market, right? But it's irrelevant. Your idol might be your money. Your idol might be your career, your sports figure, yourself, just you as a person, your physical fitness. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The idol's not even mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. The thing was that people had forgot about God. They said, oh, Moses isn't coming back. We don't know where he is. Let's just have a good time. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for we might die tomorrow. And we're living in a very similar time where Jesus has gone up into the high mountain, as it were, and he's been gone a long time. I don't know if he's coming back. Let's just eat and drink. Oh, by the way, we can offer some burnt offerings, and we can bring peace offerings. In fact, Aaron, in this really weird thing, says, today's a feast. Tomorrow will be a feast day to Yahweh. So we'll offer our token things to whatever, but then just go do what you like. And we can't let that happen to our form of worship and our life. God is not pleased with these things. This might be worth looking up. Exodus 23. And I do have them here on the sheet. You can see we're getting close. The other good thing about having the notes there is I guess you kind of know we're getting closest to the end. But this might be worth just highlighting in your Bible. And I'm also hopeful that some of these things, I hope a lot of it is challenging to you personally. Like one thing I want to say for sure is, I don't have all this figured out. We all have our different idols. I'm not one to point fingers or, say what's good or what's bad. We all have our challenges. But also some of these things might be like, how do we apply that today? And I really want you to go away with that kind of an idea. Like, how can we do this? How can we help each other in this? So, Exodus 23 is called here the 5 don'ts of idolatry. And you can see, again, hopefully I'm just quoting scriptures and putting it out there and do with it what you can. So verse 13 of Exodus 23, in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of the other gods, neither let it be heard of your mouth. Ooh. So don't even mention their names. I don't know how we do that, because maybe we need to talk about these things, but somehow, if you just hear something over and over again, it somehow legitimizes it or normalizes it. And maybe all of a sudden, we're in meeting and we're talking about, what happened in the sporting event last night or something. It just becomes a natural part of our conversation. Maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. But I think that's an example of, what do we bring into our services? What do we bring into our company here? If we just talk about stuff casually and normalize it, that might be a real stumbling block for somebody else. I think it's something we need to really think about. Verse 23, verse 24, don't bow down to them. That's pretty obvious because the idea of bowing down is to worship, to give respect, to submit to it. Same verse, don't serve them. Actually, it just goes on and on, right? Verse 24, don't bow down to the other gods, don't serve them, don't do after their works. Like that's a pretty good list, right? We don't acknowledge them. We don't serve them. We basically can. What does Paul say? There's two kings you can serve. You can either serve King Sin or King Jesus. You can't serve both. And don't do after their works, because that's the list of the works of the flesh, right? And then verse 32, it finishes off, don't make any covenant with them nor serve their gods. So, I think we need to be careful. What commitments are we making in a worldly context that then kind of binds us to that? It might be in our world of work, or again, I don't want to necessarily point out certain things because hopefully you're thinking of your own things like, oh, that could be a challenge for me. So there's in Exodus 23 a nice list of things we need to be aware of, and the scripturally speaking, the 5 don'ts when it comes to idols. This is another one that it might be worth turning up. Deuteronomy 13. This is it's a long chapter, and I don't want to go into all kinds of details. And sometimes it can be difficult to take Old Testament principles and apply them in a modern context. But this is a big deal, because what's happening in Deuteronomy 13 is, what do you do when you're settled in the land and you got all these different cities that are somewhat independent, but there's problems in these, amongst the group. And the key is that, for example, in verse 2, verse 1, you've got a prophet who arises among you, claims to be somebody special, a dreamer of dreams or a giver of visions, and he speaks these things. He does these, a big show, and everyone goes, oh, wow, he must be from God because he did this thing. And then in verse 2, he says, let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Okay, so there's the problem. It doesn't matter what they do, what sign they show, how charismatic they are. At the end of the day, if they're saying the conclusion of this is to go serve another god, then there's a problem. Okay? And you can't just kind of let that go. And he gives an idea of how you handle those situations. Basically, in those days, they weren't allowed to live in the land. So we have to act. We can't leave it unchecked. And the reason is because this kind of thinking will destroy. So it's again there in verse 13. You hear from another city that they've got either an individual or a group of people. They're called here children of Belial. I forget what modern translations have for that. Worthless sons or something. So these are, they're people that are not going to be helpful. And they say, let us go and serve other gods. See, it's all about serving other gods. So you need to smite and destroy those things. You need to get rid of those influences out of the land. So basically, idol worship, the lesson we're getting from the Old Testament is it will destroy us. So you need to destroy and get rid of all those things. The antidote really is in verse 4, isn't it? Walk after Yahweh your God, fear him, keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. So that's really the contrast. Don't follow these other idols. Doesn't matter what are people doing. Doesn't matter how enticing it sounds, or how, even if they show signs and wonders and you think it must be from God, if at the end of the day they're saying we need to worship a different God, then there's a problem. This one actually isn't in the notes, so if you're making notes on the other side, Isaiah 44, I love it every time we come to in the readings. You just look at this and you go, like, how could they be so stupid? I don't know, that's what I always think. You remember this one? They go into the forest and they chop down a tree, and they cut all up and they put it in the fire, and it gives some nice warmth, and then cook their food on it. And they go, this is great. This is great. I'm now warm, and I can cook my food, and everything's good. And on the other half of the tree, they make a carved image, and they bow down and worship it and pray to it, deliver me, for you are my God. And we're like, really? How? Like, we read that, and it's almost laughable that they would do that they would think this one half of the tree, they cut it all up and made fire out of it, and the other half of the tree, they worship it as some sort of god. But when you look in the chapter, it's just part of their everyday life. There's a carpenter, or there's a, whatever they're doing, it's just part of their life. They're essentially worshiping the works of their own hands. They're worshiping, serving the creature rather than the creator. And maybe some of that isn't so far removed from us. It might be our house, or our car, or our career, or our investments, or our accomplishments, our status in society. All these things are really just our own works. And yeah, they warm our house, and they cook our food, and we can buy stuff at the grocery store, and we basically worship that lifestyle. Particularly problematic, I think, in the West. That's certainly our experience in North America. So when I think that the caricature of Isaiah 44 and like the laughability of it, I think then we need to just sort of reflect back and say, if people could see us, would they laugh at some of the decisions we make? We're almost done here. The other thing about idols is it's all visual. And I think most of us are we're impacted by what we see, the visualness of it. I'm just going to go through a bunch of symbols here. They may or may not resonate with you. But all you got to see is a symbol for a split second, and it just brings so much. Like when you see that, what do you think of? Just all kinds of things. That one, maybe good or bad. Maybe you like this one better. But whatever. There's a whole lifestyle associated with these things, right? That one's definitely bad. That one, well, whatever. Right? There's time and money and energy invested in these things because they know how powerful. That's apparently the most successful symbol ever created, down right there. Right? So symbols. I think that's what makes idols so popular. This here, don't bother writing this down. This is actually on the handout. Actually, you've got them all. It's good. You can look ahead. Oh, that's maybe not so good. You might not come back. Anyway, this is on the next one, and I don't repeat it in my second class there. It just didn't fit on the sheet so well. So I'll just go through these quickly. Basically, this generalizes idols. It's an association with pleasure and things the flesh loves. That's really what it was about. It wasn't the Asherah pole per se. It's what I got to do when I went into amongst the groves. The power of suggestion is in the images, a lifestyle. You saw that swoosh, and it's a whole lifestyle. You see that emblem of a car? Oh, I want to drive that kind of car. Right? It's a whole lifestyle. It's really not the thing itself. It's what is suggested by it. They're visual. They distracted people from God and his ways. It was like, they just were all of a sudden off somewhere else because of the visuality of it. It diverted people's time, energy, money, and affection from the one true God. And this is probably the one that hit home to me the most. The fact that there were many idols implicitly told people, it's okay to serve this idol part of the time. There's lots of idols, so, part of this time, you serve another idol part of the time. They said, look, even if you serve Yahweh part of the time, we don't mind. You go to church on Sunday morning. That's fine. But we want some other time ourselves, right? That was the fact that there were so many, and it kind of became just overwhelming. And that's why it was so repulsive to God, because what did it say? Love the Lord thy God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, 24/7, 365 is what God wants, because he knows that's the only way that we will be successful in serving and worshiping him. So I think that was one of the real challenges. And that sounds very exclusive and very like whatever, whereas the idols were like, have at it. There's lots of us to go around. We got a God for this, a God for that. Divvy yourself up and spread yourself around. Now, Martha and I were privileged to be able to go to Kenya earlier this year. And we worked with a lot of young people there in the Life program. And it was a 2-week program, and the main focus of it was at the end of the 2 weeks, they had to go with an action plan. And we sort of got thinking to ourselves, wow, in the West, we're great consumers of Christadelphia. We come and we sit and we listen and we consume lots of stuff, and then we kind of go, and who knows what happens with it. So my intention is to try and leave you with something that's yours and yours alone to figure out, but you need to come up with an action plan. Now, last time I did these classes, it was over a week at a Bible school. So some of these might seem pretty intense to do 3 in one day. You don't have to do them all in one day, but I'd like you to think about them. So there's one of these at the end of each talk. And here's the action plan from the first one. What gods of this world do I worship? If you feel comfortable filling that in, you want to kind of remember it, do it right now. How can I rid them from my life? When I get home, I'm going to. Maybe one thing. Start small. Maybe that's maybe there's that one thing that you're like, oh, you know what? I spend too much time on Facebook. It might be that. That's probably one that I've had to deal with, right? Whatever it is, yours is different than mine. And I want to make a change. I'm going to limit myself. Or I'm going to do something. Have an action plan that you can accomplish. Now, we're a teeny weensy bit over time, but I think we started a bit late. I like to live a little bit of time if anyone wants to, share. When I did this at Manitoulin, I did it for the adults. Dead silence. Nothing. Did it with the teens. We spent 10 minutes at the end of class talking. They just want to share, and it was great. So I don't know where we're at with this group. Does anyone want to, based on those prompts, share anything with the group? I didn't ask Tyler if I was allowed to do this, but am I allowed to do this? Yeah, he went. Anyone want to share? 2 minutes. Diet Coke. Well, did you say Diet Coke?
Something that somebody said to me when doing this sort of exercise before that I found really helpful was if you're going to get rid of something, replace it with something good.
Awesome. So getting rid of something, so that middle one there, how can I get rid of it? One of the best things is to replace it with something else. So yeah, I got to stop spending so much time on fill in the blank. Yeah, but instead I'm going to do this. So I'm going to make sure my Facebook posts are biblical or something like that. Replace it with something. Or I'm not just going to listen to whatever podcast on my way to work. I'm going to listen to Wilderness Conversations. Right, replacement. Good. One more?
You're playing brainwash.
Sorry?
You were playing brainwash.
I have been. Oh dear. Probably. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Tyler.
Well, on behalf of you all, I'd like to thank Brother Chris for that first study. And we look forward to seeing